Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual breakfast sessions. I'm Larry Sashin, and today we have a great group of people to discuss what is a tip and why has it morphed from a reward into an imposition and a troublesome to everybody that touches it. But before we do that, let's thank the guy who's paying our bills, Ed Flanagan and the Era Group. Listen, you work very, very hard for your money, and if you're paying bills hand over fist, let Ed Flanagan and the Era Group sift through your bills and find that cash you've overpaid, had been charged incorrectly, get that money back for you. So, Ed Flanagan and the Era Group, back to our top tipping. Before we do that, why don't we introduce ourselves? Bob, why don't you start?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I look forward to having this chat with all of you. Brody and Associates, we're a labor, employment, and benefits law firm. We primarily represent management. We have both fast food, fine dining restaurants, and frankly, all sectors. And we do a lot of work with wage and hour issues. That includes tip, how to calculate them, and now how to comply with this new law. I'm looking forward to being with all of you.
All right, Steve.
Igor, I teach about the food and restaurant business at Columbia Business School and NYU. I've been a consultant for many years in the industry, one of the large consulting firms, and then going on my own. And I poke satire at the food industry with my background of comical ventriloquist figures. So I try to cover it all and not take us all too seriously.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And Guy.
Guy Salas with Vision Financial Strategists. We work with restaurants and retail businesses, clarifying and helping businesses maximize the details of the business to achieve profitability and consistent cash flow.
And Fred, why don't you say hello?
Morning, I'm Fred Clashman, editor and publisher of Total Food Service, and like many, I still find this an extremely confusing issue and look forward to getting some insight.
Yes, so let's get back to the topic. Tipping, how it has become confusing to everybody that's involved. But, tipping started out as a reward for service. And now it's basically an understood thing that you're going to give me money, whether I'm good, bad, or indifferent. But, during our conversation at the beginning, Bob, you mentioned that you have an opinion on it.
I have an opinion on everything. As far as this is concerned, one of the things I think this law recognizes is your point, Larry, because it specifically is talking about there's an exemption for tax on tip that are voluntary. So, we all know you go to a restaurant, you have a big party, it says there's a mandatory tip. That's not going to be deductible. So it is truly going to be at least not mandatory. I understand your point. These days, we all feel pressure. I mean, if I don't give my 20 or more percent, I feel like I'm being a bum. But the law is clear. It's got to be voluntary.
Okay, so Bob, just take a step back for people who don't know. Does this relate to the big, beautiful bill or whatever? Is that where this has come from?
You know what? Let me
take us back and let's talk about where we were and where we're going. I think we should do that for a second.
I think we should go way back, because part of tipping's heritage leads to how people believe today. And tipping came to this country from Europe because it was being done by European aristocracy for their basically lower class employees. Americans traveling in Europe saw that and said, this is really a cool thing. And they came over here and began it. But after the Civil War, when slavery was eliminated, tipping was a way of many employers, specifically the Pullman rail car company, to tip slaves, which gets into a racial effect, which some people consider tipping to be a racial and sociological issue as well. Is basically tipping people. Slaves had no other skills other than hospitality skills. So Pullman said, well, I don't have to pay much of a wage. Let the customer do it. And then it was ingrained in our system, and Bob knows, with the Fair Labor Standards Act back in the 1930s, where the minimum wage was set and tipping was excluded from the minimum wage. So that institutionalized us. So tipping came to this country as a piece of our culture that separated classes, as well as had racial implications to it. And some of those voices still carry through today.
Okay.
So if you bring that forward to July 4th of this year, President Trump signs what he calls the one big beautiful bill. It's really a tax and budget bill, but in it there are a couple of provisions, one of which says if you are receiving tip, and for the moment let's not get into the details, but if you're receiving tip, you generally aren't going to get taxed on those tips. The employer is going to be required to report them. Your W-2 form that we all get if we're an employee is going to change because it's going to have new data points in it, like how much you're getting for tips, and you're not going to have to pay for those voluntary tips.
But it's federal tax.
That's correct. Now, good point, Steve, because one thing people have to keep in mind is just that. This has nothing to do with your state. So whatever your state taxes are, you're going to actually be reporting different numbers because you're going to be deducting from your federal taxes. You're not going to be deducting from your state.
And then Medicare and Social Security. And
right. The other piece of it, though, is just basically there's a similar provision for overtime. And the one thing about the overtime is, as you all may know, if you are not exempt from overtime, you work over 40, you get time and a half, whatever your regular rate is. You're always going to have to pay taxes on the regular rate. I get $30 an hour. I'm going to pay taxes on the $30 an hour. But my overtime rate is 45, and it's that $15. That's what I'm not going to pay tax on. So we've now got a way of giving more money to the employees because they don't have to pay tax on it. It'll be an interesting statistic to see, and especially you in the restaurant business, all people who are in that know, there's some questions about how accurate the recording is. Now, how much money did I make last year? How much money did I report as a tip? How much didn't I report as a tip? The statutes here are very clear. It's got to be voluntary. It's got to be reported. So if somebody gets caught not reporting, they're not going to be able to take any of these deductions after the fact.
So does this change the level of diligence necessary from restaurateurs and operators in terms of how they record what's actually being paid and what's being collected?
I don't really think it does, because I think what the restaurateur is going to simply say is we have a formula for figuring out how much the tips are. We ask the employees, and whatever I'm told, I'm told. If the employee's making a lot of tips and not reporting it in good faith, the employers are going to say, no one told me that. I can't figure that out. So I'm not going to report it. Now, the one kind of caveat, how many people pay cash? How many people use credit card? The credit card's good. You can't really deny what's on a credit card. It is whatever it's at. It's only the cash piece. So if someone pays by credit card, leaves a cash tip, or pays the whole thing by cash, that could easily slide. But obviously credit cards are going to be seen.
It's interesting to note, and Bob, you have a handle on this. What does that actually translate into the average waiter or waitress amount of money in their pocket? Because what is the federal tax rate? Is it averages what, 10, 12, 15% for tip based upon, obviously it's a floating rate based on how much they make, but I saw a figure once, it was 15%. So basically the waiter is going to make 15% more.
But they're only going to make, and obviously, everybody knows, are we talking about a waiter who takes home 100,000, 150,000? Or are we talking about the waiter who takes home 40?
Right.
But on that sliding, as you said, on that sliding scale, keep in mind, this is only the overtime piece of it and the tip piece of it. The rest of it, nothing's going to be changed on a federal level.
But there's a cap on it too.
There are. I mean, the caps.
And this is going to really distort or complicate the issue with the restaurants have been fighting for to level the wages between back of house and front of the house. So now you have servers that aren't paying tax on something, and that's not being affected by the guy in the kitchen who makes $10 an hour. And how do you level this out now? Are restaurants going to come back to the customer now and say, give us a surcharge because we got to pay the back of house? It's really complicating operating a restaurant now. It's being a benefit for the hourly server, but it's going to be disastrous when you try to talk to employees in the back of the house.
But Guy, I think your presumption is the back of the house gets nothing out of it. There's no tip pool. If there were a tip pool, the back of the house would be included. If there's no tip pool and the back of the house gets nothing.
When I read the law, it said that you had to be in a tipped position. And a back of house position is not a tipped position.
I'm not sure I agree with you.
Because they said your standard job has to be a tipped position. If you split responsibilities to, let's say, be 5, 10 hours, 20 hours a week in culinary and 20 hours a week in service, a tip position, it only affects the 20 hours in tip service.
There's a definition of who a tipped worker is.
And if you look at that,
we ought to start, really what we should have started with is, I have no idea. That really should be the answer, because I don't know. We're reading what it says. We're making some reasonable interpretations, but it's going to have to take some time to shake out. So, for example, I look at it differently than you said, because I say, hey, there's a definition of tip. The person who's prepping the food in the kitchen, that's a tipped position.
Not in New York.
Not in New York. No,
but if you look at the statute, it says it is.
That's not the law. Your job,
the way I read the law, you have to be in a position that is strictly a tip position. It has to be, your income has to come from tips. You can't be in a role that gets a tip on top of it. And then further complicated is this management people, other people with their hands in what they get tips. Because, technically a manager is not allowed to take any tips.
Right.
So it's going to complicate things. And it's also going to distort or damage what restaurants have been trying to do, which is to level the playing field on wages. Because servers at places like the Rainbow Room make such a salary that they exceed their GM salaries in many cases. And now you're giving these people a benefit.
So I have a silly question to ask. The government rolled out this bill that it seems that nobody clearly understands. Is there a date, considering that tax time is rolling around really soon, that, and you're going to have to, after that, we're already working on the new rules come next year. When is the start date on this?
January 1st, 25.
Okay, so
25, it's already in
so
effect.
it's already in effect.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing taxes right now, how do I plan this considering nobody knows what to do?
And the other question I had, Larry, is the 8% floor that restaurants have to meet. The tips have to report it up to, I think it's 8%. And if they don't make that amount, if they don't report that amount of money, they can push it back to the employee. How does this work now? Because 8% of sales, they're not going to be reporting the same amount of tip, paying on the same amount of tips. So who's going to pick up this difference? Or does that distort that law too? There's so many questions. When I read this law, I was dumbfounded with the number of questions that you could start writing down.
Let me just mention on this one point that we're all talking about right now. There's something called the occupations that customarily and regularly received tips on or before December 31st, 24. This is from the government. It's a link they put into their materials, and it has a list of jobs that are tipped: bartender, wait staff, food servers. That all makes sense.
Yeah.
But then to your point, dining room, cafeteria attendants, chef, cook, food preparation workers, fast food and counter workers, dishwashers, host staff. They've got things that are very different than what you guys have been talking about.
So they may have clarified more than when I was reading the law.
And it's going to keep happening because they're going to keep putting revisions in as people like you and like us start saying, hey, wait a minute, what about this? And all of a sudden they're going to, okay, let's get another.
So the comment I'm hearing is that waiters and restaurant people are thinking the customers are going to tip less because they know that the waiters and waitresses are making more, which, by the way, the average percentage of tip has been dropping since the pandemic.
Yes.
And they're going to tip less, thinking now that, like in California, where everyone makes a minimum wage, so tips are on top of the minimum wage. So the cities with the lowest tip percentage are in California. All of a sudden, customers go, well, they're making more money, so I'm not going to leave 20% now. I'm going to leave 15%.
But how much of that not?
What you're saying is the United States is becoming Europe, where the waiters are paid. You don't need to leave a tip. People leave the change.
Well, I mean, the other thing is we now pay at the table in many cases, and I think that's changed the whole way that we tip.
Yeah.
This idea that there's an iPad in front of your face that says 12, 15, 20 or custom, I think has changed the culture of how we go about it too.
Well, they've also changed, the dynamics have changed. You go in to get a cup of coffee at a coffee bar, tip me. Every place you go now, and they're shaming the customer, putting these screens up, facing the customers, so the person next to you can see, oh, I didn't tip, or I tipped 15, I should have tipped 20. The restaurant industry itself needs to sit down and really think through what they're doing, because they're damaging their own brand by doing all these things, pushing things down, adding service charges, a 3.5% service charge for credit card fees. All you're doing is telling me that you're really in financial difficulty. The 20% service charge, I can understand the argument if it really goes to the employee. We're making decisions there. COVID changed the playing field because we learned that people are willing to give and do things in generosity. But now we've gone beyond COVID, and I think we're starting to exploit that generosity, and people are getting tired of it. You're crossing the tipping point. So it's a combination of factors that need to be addressed. Yeah, there's a combination of factors I think that need to be addressed here.
I've got a question here. Is a service charge considered the same way as a tip?
A service charge is wages paid if it passes through.
So management so the company itself can share in a service charge.
Yeah, because it depends on how it's written out, but a service charge is not a tip. A tip is completely discretionary from the customer's angle. If I tell you it's 15%, like the 8 people come in and we're charging 20% for 8 people, that's a service charge. If you want to leave a tip on top of that, that's discretionary, and that's gratuity.
And I think it's interesting, just by the way, and I can't help the lawyer when he comes out and says, when someone sticks that iPad in front of my face and it has the suggested tip 20%, is that voluntary? Now, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, there's incredible pressure on it to do that. And so this law is supposed to be going back to the good old days where tips were truly voluntary. And someone's going to start arguing, I'll bet you, that they're not really voluntary. And that'll mess all of this up. With a quick caveat, we only got 3 years.
A study was done that 60 to 75% of the people pick the middle percent.
Yeah.
Well, they've added custom tip to these, customize a tip, especially in coffee shops and bagel places, because when they're asking a starting thing of 15% to give the bagel person who's handing you a bag, got a little bit much. And now they've added custom. Maybe that'll show up on these pads, because truly what they're stacking on the back of the diner is incredible. If you think about it, the stress that the prices have gone up, the service has gone down. Now you're asking for a tip. And then on top of that, anybody that really looks into this one big, beautiful bill and sees and does a little research and finds out in 2023 that there were $77.6 billion in tip handed out in 2023. The government is not going to go without that money. They're going to get it from someplace. And where's it going to come from?
That's part of the deficit. And that's also why there's a length of time on this bill. It's what, 2 years, Bob, this thing in effect?
It's the end of Trump's term, basically,
Yeah,
which I also think is an interesting political thing that I don't think was coincidental, just because it makes sense for a politician. He had a tax cut, quote unquote. When he gets out of office, that tax cut's going to go away. So it'll leave whoever comes after him the question of, do I want to continue this or not? And she's going to decide whatever she or he decides, but it'll be interesting. It'll become very political.
You know, it's funny how something that on the surface everybody goes, yeah, they're working really hard, gets it, that they're going to get it. And if you dig really deep, so I'm a business owner. I'm a business owner, and I got to sit in front of my accountant. And what do I do? How do I handle this?
Well, here's the big thing. I mean, look at the restaurant companies that eliminated tip. They decided they were going to do the right thing. Everyone is going to be paid equally, et cetera, et cetera. Look at who ends up paying at this point. It's the customer, because that tip percentage gets built into the food cost. So suddenly that food is now going to be 15 or 20% higher or 25% higher. We're also looking at waiters and waitresses who have traditionally made a lot more per hour on tips than suddenly the new wage that they're going to get, which is going to be in the 20s or something like that. And they're going to, if it's a law and everyone has to eliminate it, that's one thing. Suddenly we're going to be paying a lot more to eat. So we've lost some of the discretion that we like when we eat out. And we're also going to be paying more for this. The psychology of this thing is a challenge because it's become part of our culture. It's not just a thing that we have to do. It's something we do. Right. We do. We may not like it, but we do it. To eliminate it has a lot of repercussions.
If I could, I wanted to throw in two issues that we ought to keep in mind. One, we're talking about what this is going to cost. Our guesstimate, and it's really just us trying to, look at some of the statistics. We're guessing federal revenue is going to get reduced by about $150 billion. That's the guess of how much taxes we're not going to pay because of this bill. I wouldn't mind having $150 in my pocket, but in the grand scheme of our budget, that's not a huge number. Still $150 billion. So that's what we think this will probably cost.
Yeah, but when you take the $150 billion here and all the nickel and diamond going on down the budget, it adds. It's a piece of a very large number, and so you can't. It's very difficult to sit and say that if it's small, it's not going to have an impact. It's part of a big impact. It's like cost of goods sold in a restaurant. If you don't really watch the pennies in cost, it's gonna add up very quickly. And so
you're completely right. Billion here, billion there starts to add up to money, right? That's what they say.
That's right.
And that's this.
Which straw breaks the camel's back? Which is the question.
Yeah.
Is the question here. So,
Larry, can I throw out one other thing?
Sure.
We've been talking, we're kicking around how burdensome this is going to be on the employers. Keep in mind, a big piece of this is going to come from the payroll companies, because the new tax recording requirements, you're going to want to know, how much am I paying in overtime? How much am I giving in tips? How much tips is being credited to an employee? And payroll companies are going to have to provide this service just as a practical matter. That's what they're going to do. The government's already got a new W-2 form that specifically is asking for how much the tips are, and it's going to have to ultimately ask for how much the overtime is. And so those numbers are going to be given. But I think the payroll companies, I would say to all restaurateurs, if you have a payroll company, you should be talking to them now, because they're going to have to, unfortunately for you, retroactively give you what the numbers were for the first half of the year, which you didn't pay any attention to because there was no reason to. And then for the rest of the year and for the rest until 28, you're going to want to get this information out to your employees. You're going to have to. So they're going to have to do this.
So does that mean that the payroll companies are going to raise prices because they have extra work to do?
Interestingly, I don't know whether you guys have seen that. I haven't. There were a number of things that, especially in New York, where there's so many compliance issues, I don't generally see the payroll companies raising their prices immediately because of these things. Over time, will they? Sure. I just don't know whether they do it. I don't know whether your bill is going to be bigger this year for payroll because of this bill.
What we notice in dealing with payroll companies is they don't necessarily increase an independent fee, but they add. It's like merchant services. There are all these other charges they can charge, add to it, and they make their money back. But a lot of it's already recorded because the credit card companies have to report the credit card tips. So all this information is there, and they have the information on overtime versus regular hours. Really, just changing the report a little bit. It isn't a very big change for a reporting company. Now, when you get more into the minutia of it, there may be other things I'm not considering superficially. So there could be some significant changes in there, but superficially, probably not going to be a significant impact. But if they're going to add fees for it, like with the ACA reporting and stuff, and how that works. And they say they do that reporting for you for the health insurance, but they do parts of it. You have to do the rest of it. So you really need to work very carefully with your payroll company and understand what they're going to cut, what they're going to handle, and how much of it they're going to handle. Not just, yes, we handle it. You really need to understand the minutia of the conversation.
One
So-
other detail I think would be important for you to tell all the restaurateurs, as easy as it is to pay no attention to this right now, I would try to figure out what happened in the first 9 months or first 7 months of the year. Because if you wait till next April when you try to do that, that's or really the end of January when the W-2s have to come out, it's going to be tremendous headache. And
It's a very
Larry, you
good
talk
point,
about the burden.
because with the ACA reporting, when that first happened, many companies were doing it and weren't doing it, and you were left with a very short window of time to go back and figure out this data. And it was very complicated to figure out because the checklist you have to go through is quite extensive. So in this case here, you're right. Get on top of this now. Don't wait till the last minute. And if your payroll company isn't doing it, talk with them or consider alternatives, because you really don't want to be at the last minute trying to solve this problem.
So guys, I appreciate everything we're doing, and I know we can go another hour. I just have one more question to go, and then we'll go into our goodbyes. So who are the winners and losers here?
I don't think there are winners and losers here.
Okay.
I think the dust is going to settle, and there's going to be gains in certain areas, losses. But I think the end result is the customer needs to be provided the experience and the entertainment value to justify giving a tip. And restaurateurs need to understand that you can't just keep passing everything on through additional charges. You've got to, at some point, dig into your numbers and figure out what your business needs to run successfully and manage the details of the business before you start passing it along or continue passing it along. So I don't know if they're going to be winners or losers. I think it's really going to be in how you manage your business.
Okay.
Or how much
Thank
cash you pay your employees.
Guys,
I mean, at the end of the day, let's just go under the radar and forget about it.
Which
So-
is unfortunately very common when we spend a
It's
lot of
very
time dealing
common.
with
So
exactly that.
Steve, take a second and just talk about what that looks like.
What it looks like is suddenly your restaurant fails to exist in the world of the government. No, the reality of it is, and I've had many clients do this
Right.
and over the years, and I've visited some in prison, is the fact that you are not recording your sales and
Right.
you're paying people in cash. So you have a system outside of your four-wall system. And as I tell my clients and students, if it's so loose that you're taking cash out of the business, it's likely you have partners that you don't know about. But it also means that you're paying employees either all in part in cash, which means those employees are not building up capital. And I don't mean literal capital, but capital with the federal government. So at some point, they may not be covered by workman's comp. They may not be covered with unemployment's comp. They may not be building up Social Security and Medicare credits. So
Very
it's
important.
It's a absolutely quick fix for a pain point that's going to have an incredible amount of stress and pain later on.
That goes back
Steve,
to quick
if I
fixes,
could,
long-term. Go on.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it goes back to the point. Quick fixes have long-term impacts, and you really need to think things through. Especially if you're in a restaurant where you are thinking about selling at some point.
Oh,
you're going to change your EBITDA
Yeah.
structure, which means the multiples are going to be off. So
Yeah.
this has a lot of impact.
Or if your
Plus, I mean,
business runs
Steve-
into trouble and you need clear value for the insurance company,
That's right.
which is what happens, how can you prove sales?
Steve, you quickly said, you visited some in prison and, we chuckled, but I mean, just so everyone's clear, that's not a joke.
No,
And this is one of the things when the Department of Labor hears about that, they have no patience for this. They will do everything they can to destroy you for this. So
Yeah.
it's a big deal. It's like not paying my taxes is great. I make a lot more money every year
And-
until I get caught.
The
Yeah.
number one way restaurateurs get caught is if they get turned in by an employee who gets pissed at them.
That's right.
Which
It's
happens
vulnerable
all the
employee.
time.
On that
Which happens
comforting
all the
note,
time.
guys, we really got to go home. So
Larry's paying all of us cash today, by the way.
yes, that's right. I slipped it through the computer. Before we go, I just want to thank Ed Flanagan and the Era Group one more time. Listen, I've been saying this for 2 years now. If you want to get what you paid for, if you are a very busy business owner and have no time to audit your book, call Ed Flanagan and the Era Group. They will sift through your invoices and your contract and get you what you paid for. And if they think you're paying too much, they will help you renegotiate your contract. So Ed Flanagan, the Era Group. Listen, guys, let's go around the room and give that one little tidbit of information that anybody who's watching this should know. Bob, why don't you start?
I'll start with the easiest thing. I think you got to grab this thing, address it immediately, go to your payroll company, start figuring out what the numbers are for the first part of the year so that you can kind of easily roll into 26 as opposed to scrambling like crazy.
Okay, Steve.
Well, the first thing is obviously where the show is not sponsored by a hair growth company. Just kidding. which to me is an important takeaway. On the reality side, it's a fantastic business, and my only vision is what we talked about earlier. Today's today and tomorrow's tomorrow. Let's make it happen today. Let's suck it in, and in 2 years we'll see where we are.
And Guy.
I'm in complete agreement with Bob and Steve. Restaurants really need to handle this now. They need to understand and work to manage the details, the basics, and understand your cash flow so you can manage these changes going forward. Don't leave this to the last second and be in a deficit situation where you can't manage it, both time-wise and fund-wise.
I see a whole bunch of extensions coming this year on taxes. Fred.
If your people are truly your number one asset, then get this figured out and get them on the right track with you, because you're going to need them in order for this thing to continue to grow.
Okay, let's go back to tipping. Tipping was a reward at one point, and now it's sort of like a gnat that keeps stinging you and bothering you every day until it disappears. This isn't going to disappear. This is something that has to be confronted right now. So we're going to be back next week, and I hope you join us. Until then, I only have two things to say. Everyone, stay positive, test negative, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you very much.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Goodbye.